A report came out recently detailing the exact circumstances of Kevin Durant's follow-up to his original trade request. After he felt as though his first trade request had been being ignored, he decided to meet with ownership rather than management. And with ownership, he decided to present an ultimatum. In doing this, Kevin Durant leveraged his own value as a superstar player versus what the Nets actually wanted to do, and for the first time, they actually decided to say no. And as innocuous of a detail as this could potentially appear to be on the absolute surface, really this could be a huge deal and the first sign of some turning tides in the NBA landscape. Before continuing on this video, if you end up enjoying this video, then please be sure to subscribe. It only makes sense that you would subscribe if you enjoy this video. If you like the content, you presumably would like to see more content, and you get to do that through subscribing. Also drop a like on this video. Rudy lives through likes. It's literally his diet. So if you want Rudy to not starve, feed him the likes. I don't know where to go with this bit anymore. It's not a bit. I have him chained in my basement. Player empowerment is something that I have talked about on this channel quite a bit. In fact, I would probably say it's one of the staples of this channel because it's one of my favorite things to talk about in the sport. I think the cultural dynamic and the power dynamic and its gradual shift is really, really intriguing. And through this shift, power, as we all well know, has been gradually falling more and more into the hands of the players. Me personally, this is a shift that I'm all for because, well, not to get too political here, but a bunch of employees taking over an organization and seizing the means of production is not something that I'm necessarily against. Just a little bit of seizing of the means, just a little bit, as a treat. I have them chained in my basement. That said, there's been a growing tension in the NBA that feels as though it's going to be boiling over soon. And because of that, there are some truly historic CBA negotiations coming up. The forecast is definitely showing a high likelihood of a massive lockout. As players continue to gain more and more control of their own destinies and thus how these franchises operate, the ownership and management and coaches that used to have the utmost authority have seen said authority slip. And the thing is, in many ways, they've had no choice in this matter because it is the players who hold all of the leverage. These players and their talent as basketball players is the product that the NBA is selling. How they package it with different teams and salary cap and all that shit, that's just their way of packaging the product. The product is these players. But contrary to what 50-year-old white men on Facebook wearing Oakleys might tell you, players are actually people. And because they're people, they can use their own autonomy to get their true value as a product. So assuming the players take back that power, the NBA then has no product to sell. It's taken players a long time to fully understand their value and leverage it in their favor, and they still haven't taken it all the way to what I think its natural conclusion may be, which is a topic for another day. But regardless of that, I think we'd all agree that players have a lot of fucking power now. As we have gone further and further down this road, we've seen players get more and more bold with throwing their weight around in regards to team decisions. The best of the best NBA players have an air of power with them because of their immense value to franchises, and because of that power, they can pretty much do whatever the fuck they want with not too many consequences. Now, that same principle does not apply to role players. Danny Green cannot go big dick it in the front office, and because of that, it's not quite the hammer and sickle fantasy that I think a lot of leftist NBA fans have. It's really more of a capitalist mindset where value is determined by money and all of that, but this is not the video for this. I digress. The point I'm making is Kevin Durant and Kyrie can call their front office and ownership and tell them to fire Kenny Atkinson and hire Steve Nash. And they can tell them to give DeAndre Jordan a $30 million contract. And they can make them trade their entire future for James Harden. And Sean Marks and ownership would indulge Kevin Durant and Kyrie. That is until the first successful pushback from the other side of player empowerment. The first push from those losing power that actually makes you say, hey, maybe they do have a little bit of balls. That push, of course, that I am referring to, the initial one from the Nets, was when they refused to have Kyrie Irving participate as a part-time player within their roster because of his vaccination status. And this was a decision that they stood firm on until they didn't. So ultimately it was for nothing, and they potentially strained that relationship for nothing. But at the same time, them at least attempting to put their foot down for a moment was definitely a sign that they were kind of tired of dealing with those guys' bullshit. Then comes this offseason, and Kevin Durant has the incredibly audacious request of fire Sean Marks and fire Steve Nash. Of course, this is something he's pleading to ownership, not the general manager, because it'd be weird to tell Sean Marks to fire himself. But this backfired because ownership was basically like, you know what? No, I think we're good on doing what you say all the time now. Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, KD and Kyrie have thrown their weight around with this organization to a very high degree in the past because they know the value they carry as star players. So this is something that's been built up. It's something they've done consistently with the Nets, and it feels as though it reached a boiling point. At a certain point for the Nets and ownership, it became a matter of principle. Even if bending to the will of these star players would objectively be a better decision for your franchise, as a matter of self-respect, they couldn't continue to allow this to happen. Now here's the thing, I'm not going to hit the alarm bells and make a big deal out of this and be a complete reactionary and say some shit like, this is player empowerment gone too far, because I don't think it necessarily is. The problem is not the power and influence that these players have, because frankly, I think they're the ones who own the power, being that they're the product the league is selling. It's not about that. It's about the manner in which they leverage said power. If you're doing that in a disrespectful and demeaning way to those people in the front office and ownership and all that shit's not cool, even if you didn't not have a right to have some of that power. That's really where I think this problem exists with the front office and these players. I don't think Sean Marks has an issue doing what these guys want, but he doesn't like the tone they're asking him to do it in. I am all for star players having a huge say, but don't be an asshole about it. And no, I don't just mean in the like professionalism way of don't be an asshole. I mean like actually don't be an asshole. As you may or may not know, because I've ranted about it a couple of times now, I think professionalism as a concept is a complete fucking scam, and really it's just used to suppress those below you in a social or work structure. And if the concept didn't exist, people would be speaking out of turn, as they call it now, a lot more frequently and getting what they deserve, rather than being disrespected and asking to be quiet about it for the sake of professionalism. I have them chained in my basement. Basically, the concept of professionalism is used by those in power to silence those below them. Point for something else, but it applies here. So I'm not making that professionalism argument. It's just literally on a human level, respect your coworkers and the people who are working for you. Don't be just pointing at who you want fired on a whim like you're the king of England at the end of the table of a huge feast, pointing at random people who piss you off that you want to see executed. It's that kind of vibe that I'm genuinely getting from the reports about how those guys have treated that front office, and from just their overall history. So Nets ownership is choosing their people over the talent. It's gonna make them a worse basketball team, but it will be a worse basketball team that has a lick of self-respect, a modicum of a spine. And to me, that is worth it. What has always bothered me about the downfall of the Nets, which has been driven by the decision-making of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, is that they drove this downfall and made the decisions that they did in complete contrast into what theoretically should have been what attracted them to the Nets in the first place. Like, there was one distinct reason to pick the Nets over the Knicks as they did that offseason, a reason so significant that I actually wasn't surprised when they ended up picking the Nets when many people were. And that reason was the culture that the Nets had developed, combined with an extremely impressive front office work over the past couple of seasons. The importance of the Nets team that came the year before Kevin Durant and Kyrie's arrival goes severely understated in the influence of the future of that team. That team was the Cinderella story of the NBA. After recovering from one of the worst trades of all time in the Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett move, they managed to actually build a semi-respectable roster despite having almost no assets, and they cultivated a culture that was very, very pro-player. And though they were not a great basketball team, they built an environment that had underdog players exceed expectations, and it was really just a beautiful thing. This is what made the Nets a prime free agency destination, the environment that they created. They showed themselves to be a very well-ran organization that had an extremely positive relationship with its players. Then, after being attracted to that team for those reasons, they then go to that team and have the head coach fired when he was the main reason that culture existed. And then they have multiple players who were a part of that previous team's success traded away for their friends or cut off in the rotation for their friends, with DeAndre Jordan over Jared Allen. Oh, and the new coach also was a friend as well. They walked into a situation that was primed for them to succeed with their hands off, and then they decided to put their hands on and they fucked everything up. The sad part of all of this is that it might have actually gone down differently if KD and Kyrie actually knew what the hell they were doing and didn't just do what they felt like doing. The nepotism on display with the decision making on their behalf speaks for itself. But the thing that stands out here is KD and Kyrie had the control to create whatever they wanted around them. It was entirely in their hands. They basically were the GM in many ways. But as it turns out, they fucking suck at being general managers. They sunk the ship, and now they're looking at people to point fingers at to blame for sinking the ship. Bro, you're the one who shot a cannonball through the bottom, not Sean Marks. Why are you mad at Sean Marks? So now Kevin Durant has made his presumably long and thin bed, and now he has to lie in it. You could say he is slim reaping what he sowed. That last joke was Rudy's, so if you hated that, it's not my fault. I have him chained in my basement. Anyways, this video was longer than I anticipated it being, and hopefully my last Kevin Durant video in a while, because God knows I'm exhausted of the guy of a topic, but I've also felt justified pretty much any time that I have talked about him, because the guy's in the news all the time. But yeah, that is it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.